Hey, so it's the early hours of the morning, and this wasn't really a planned video, and I'm going to make it very, very concise because I've touched on this issue before. Winston Churchill, Britain's leader during World War II, needs no introduction, one of the most famous leaders of the 20th century. Winston Spencer Churchill. He's been the subject of countless books, films, documentaries, and in 2002 he was named the greatest Briton. And I believe that was probably the right choice. In our long history, I think that Churchill really does stand out. I mean, there's other great figures like Lord Nelson, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, and others, but Churchill does stand out. And I think his critics need to recognise that without his leadership in World War II, um, the outcome of history would have been very different. I mean, millions of people, literally, um, owe that man gratitude. But, and this is a big but, there is something of a tendency in this country, particularly from the right, to have this mentality that Churchill's above criticism. And we often associate with political correctness with the left. But actually, on the issue of this, the right can be pretty politically correct. And what I mean by that is they have this knee jerk, almost hysterical reaction every time someone criticizes Churchill. Now, I have a big problem with that because I don't like personality cults around anybody. Anybody. Period. Winston Churchill did have a very controversial side. He did hold racist views, and there were things that he done that cannot be justified. So, the latest controversy is that John McDonnell, the Labour Shadow Chancellor, called him a villain. Alois backtracked somewhat on those remarks, and that was in reference to the Tonypandy strike of 1911, which Churchill took a very hardline approach with. Churchill's attitude to Labour relations domestically was anything but glowing. Churchill's role in the Gallipoli disaster was nothing to shout about, not to mention his attitudes to the Indian subcontinent. And I made a reference to that recently. So I think when we're assessing Churchill, I mean, I will say this: John McDonnell, it's pretty rich coming from him, and the charge that it may be to distract from Labour's domestic policies or Labour's internal squabbles may well be true. I mean, this is a man who praised Stalin, so it's pretty rich coming from John McDonnell to attack Churchill as a villain when he praises a Soviet dictator. And there's too many on the left that praise communist dictators. And if we're talking about mortality, even allowing for the fact that, like most leaders, Churchill killed innocent people. I mean, the bombing of Dresden was immoral, but it doesn't even come close to the millions and millions killed by Stalin. So I think it's pretty rich for McDonnell to attack Churchill as a villain, but he is on record as downplaying Stalin. And there's Labour Party figures like Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott said that in reflection, Mao Zedong done more good than harm. Mao Zedong, whose policies directly led to more deaths than any leader in the 20th century, including Hitler. So the left has to be tread very carefully when they're attacking Churchill because too many on the left downplay communist dictators. So the hypocrisy of that I take issue with. But I would take issue with those on the right who say that Churchill's above criticism. Boris Johnson, for example, basically took that attitude in his response to John McDonnell. I take issue with that. In Britain, we do not have personality cults. Save that for Thailand. Save that for countries which don't respect freedom of expression. Um, I support John McDonnell's right to criticise Churchill. We must support that right. because after all, Churchill was a wartime leader who fought for liberty. So it would be a bit rich if we say that Churchill's above criticism. We don't have personality cults in this country. So I think there needs to be, when people attack Churchill, they need to see the bigger picture. And they need to recognize that all the faults that he had, um, the biggest picture is that he did save this country from Nazi totalitarianism. There's no question about that. But those who have a knee jerk reaction that, oh, how dare you question Churchill? Churchill had many flaws. He did. And we cannot have this situation where people are shouted down and censored simply for saying Churchill had a darker side, because he did. I understand James O'Brien on LBC. I don't often agree with James O'Brien, but I understand he said Churchill was a hero who had a villainous side. And I think that's probably fair.